dies, the boys die, the daughters-in-law are going to follow her. Naomi says, no, go to your people. Orpah leaves. Ruth says, your people, my people, your God, my God. Where you sleep, I'll sleep, all this stuff. Okay? That's chapter 1, basically. Then you have chapter 2 and 3 that are, in my estimation, just a couple of days. It's just 2 or 3 days, I think, that took place, because it seems like the events are just like this right here in that. So you have all of that. We've got 3 chapters at this point. And even chapter 4 is part of that. Is even that last day, the 3rd day, where Boaz goes and talks to the nearer kinsman. And then we come to verse 13, and we cover a long period of time in one verse. When it says, so Boaz took Ruth and she was his wife, she became his wife. Well, we know that in this time, you didn't just elope. You didn't say, all right, will you marry me? All right, let's get married right now. There was a process to it. And so we have the marriage, and we have the conception and delivery of a son, which we know is 9 months, in one verse. So we spend 3 chapters, almost 4 chapters, taking up just a few days, except for chapter 1, I'm sorry. Chapter 2, 3, and part of 4 that just cover a short period of time. And then you have this little verse that covers the next year to a year and a half almost. That's bonus material for you. And the women said to Naomi, verse 14, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. A lot of questions about who his refers to when it says his name. Is it referring to Boaz? Is it referring to the son, Obed? Or is it referring to the Lord? Depends on which version you read. Depends on which theologian or commentator you read. Personally, I think it is Jehovah. I think it is the Lord, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. They called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, obviously, the women did not say he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. I don't think we can infer that. I don't think that's what the passage is implying, nor can we infer that. I don't think the women had already named Obed, Jesse, and David in that order. All right. Verse 18, now these are the generations of Pharez. Pharez begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram. Ram begat Amminadab. Amminadab begat Nahshon. And Nahshon begat Salmon. And Salmon begat Boaz, and Boaz begat Obed. And Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. So here we are at the end of the book. Number 1, I want you to see the marriage of Ruth and Boaz. The marriage of Ruth and Boaz. The Bible says in verse 13 that Boaz took Ruth. He took Ruth. Now, was she standing right there at the end of verse 12 whenever they are praising him? There's a possibility of that. I don't think so, but there is a possibility. But I don't think, even if she was standing there, I don't think the implication is he took her and left. I think the implication is he took her home. He did not just take her, he took her home. Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, referring to Enoch. It says, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. God took him. Now, where did God take him? Heaven. Or home. Took him home. And it is the exact same phraseology here that Boaz took Ruth. He didn't just kidnap her and run off. He took her home. We have the culmination of the redemption of Ruth here. It just culminates right here in these verses. Ruth surrendered herself to the will of the Redeemer. Whenever she went in to Boaz and laid at his feet, she says, I am presenting myself under basically the Levirate law as a widow if for redemption. And she surrendered herself to the will of the Redeemer. And she requested the grace that only he could provide. Now there was a nearer kinsman, but he refused it. So only Boaz could give the grace, the redemptive grace. There's more things we could say about the picture of Christ in this. But Boaz received Ruth. Boaz said, I will have you. And in turn, Ruth received Boaz. And Ruth goes to be with the Redeemer in his home. And it's such a beautiful picture of the relationship, what Christ has done for us. When we come to him, we lay ourselves basically at his feet, and we surrender we get rid of our baptism notions, we get rid of our church membership notions, our good life notions about salvation. And we get rid of those and we surrender ourselves to him and say, I will do it your way. I'll receive you, Jesus Christ. And we accept the grace that only he can provide. He's already said, I receive you. And we receive him, and he's gone to prepare a place for us. And we'll go and be in his home one day. So Boaz took Ruth. Letter B, it was blessed by Jehovah. The marriage of Ruth and Boaz was blessed by Jehovah. We don't know how long Ruth and Mahlon had been married. But we know this. Generally in this culture, you didn't wait to have kids. You know, in our world, some people, they wait, they want to travel, or they want to, save up money and buy a house, or do all kinds of things, whatever it is, before they have children. Well, they didn't do that in this day. Children were farmhands. Some of you experienced that. Some of y'all were part of a family that you had kids to work the farm. We didn't do that. But in this culture, man, you had kids as quickly as you could. We don't know how long they were married, but we do know that Ruth and Mahlon did not have children. Why? Why did they not have children? Were they not married very long? Were they only married a few weeks before Mahlon died? Or maybe just a couple of months? I don't know. But, was it, the question I give you is, was it because Ruth was considered barren? Was she not able to have children? And we don't know anything about Orpah after she leaves Naomi. But it doesn't seem that she had children either whenever Chilion died. I don't know the situation, but was Ruth considered barren? Was she not able to have children? I don't know. But I give you this question. Was God working the whole time? I'm not asking for a response. Was it just God working? If Ruth had had a child with Mahlon, there would not have been a need for a redeemer. Did you remember now she could have married Boaz. I mean, she still could have married Boaz. But it was the redemption that was the big deal. If you go back to this chapter, verse 10 of chapter 4, Boaz is speaking to the elders. He says, we go back to verse 9. Boaz said unto the elders and all the people, Ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. He says, this is what I'm doing. This is the end game. To raise up the inheritance of Mahlon. If Ruth had had a child, that would not have even been a consideration. Could they have been married still? Yeah. Would they have? I don't know. I don't know. That would have given Naomi the inheritance, the rights, if you will, to the land. Now, though, Ruth will be the great-grandmother of the most beloved king of Israel, David. And Ruth will be the great, however many it is, grandmother of the Redeemer of the world. The advent of the Messiah. And it's odd, that's not the right word, interesting, how the little things that we overlook, that we don't even pay attention to, oftentimes have the biggest bearing on life. We read through the book and we never even think about the fact that if Ruth, not till now, we haven't talked about it. We haven't talked about the fact that if Ruth had had a child, we may not even have this book, the book of Ruth. Now, obviously, the Messiah would have come through, the line would have been somewhere. But it wouldn't have been through Ruth, probably. It would have come from somewhere else. But now, because what maybe seemed like God is bitter, He hath dealt bitterly with me in that I don't have a child. Naomi doesn't have a grandson. Her husband, her boys are dead. She doesn't have anybody to carry on the name. And God hath dealt bitterly with me. And the whole time God is working to deal sweetly with her still. See, that's one of the reasons that I don't think that God did deal bitterly with her. I think life just is hard sometimes. Life's difficult. And decisions we make put us into circumstances that make it even harder. And Elimelech left Bethlehem, and he shouldn't have done it. And he puts his family in a position where Naomi is without really a protector in a foreign land. But God's working. He's working all things together for good to them who love Him, to them who are the called according to His purpose. And Ruth ends up being the great grandmother to the Redeemer, the Messiah. Number 4, Ruth bore Obed. She gave birth to Obed. Now, in the passage here, it says that the women named, verse 17, and the women, her neighbors, gave it, the child, a name saying, there's a son born Naomi. They called his name Obed. Josephus says that Naomi named Obed. I don't know if it's important. I don't know if it's important who named Obed. But I know this. Obed means servant. In the Hebrew, Obed means servant. In the Greek, it means worshiper. I don't think you can apply worshiper to it, but I think we will stay with the Hebrew word meaning servant. Meaning servant. And Obed becomes the grandfather of the great servant king, David. Was there a greater servant king in Israel ever than David? That's one of the reasons he was considered the greatest king by Israel. He's considered the greatest king. Because he was God's king, yes. Because of the things he accomplished, yes. But I think also because he was the great servant king. He took care of people. Remember, he's the one that went after Mephibosheth. Got the wrong M. The wrong M-E. He's the one that said, hey, is there any of the house of Saul that I can do good to them? And Zippah says, there's a Mephibosheth. He's out in Lodabar. He says, bring him. And he does good to him. And David did good to the people. He was the great servant king. And he is the great grandfather of the forever servant king, Jesus Christ. Took on the form of a servant. Jesus Christ. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation. And it says, became a servant. Took on the form of a servant. Now, that's not the end of it. It became obedient. And that is the mind of Christ, I think, the mind of obedience. But I think included in that is the mind of service, of being a servant. And here, Obed is named servant. And it is a great kind of reset point, I think, for the genealogy of Christ. Number 2, the restoration of Naomi. Remember chapter 1? I know it's been a while. But remember chapter 1? We met Naomi. And she loses her sons, loses her husband, goes back to Bethlehem, and she says, They said, oh, it's Naomi. Sweetness. God is sweet. She says, don't talk to me about God being sweet. God's bitter. Call me Mara. Because God hath dealt bitterly with me. The sweetness was gone out of her life. You know, in that day, people were named after they were born. And so they took kind of the personality of the child. And they would name and we all, one of us over here and all of us understand what that's about. You know, it doesn't take you long to see the personality of your child. Just a couple of months and you get an idea of what this person... We knew early on that Maddie was, as a baby, she was not going to be a laugher. Now, she is now. But you try to get Maddie to laugh and she just... You remember that? Just somber, sober-faced. I dare you to make me laugh. Very stoic. You know, and then there was Olivia who... Well, we're not going to talk about that. But in chapter 1, God was bitter. In chapter 4, God is blessed. I imagine Naomi throughout all this. You know, she comes home, she's bitter, she's upset. Just a couple of days go by. And she's sending Ruth out into the field. Well, I mean, Ruth goes in the field herself. She takes the initiative to do it. And she's at home. Naomi's at home just bitter, upset. Ruth comes through the door and she's expecting her to have enough grain for food for that night to make a cake, some bread for that night. She comes in, remember, she's got that big old sack full of grain. And her spirit lifts a little bit. She says, oh my word, who did you go see? Where did you get this? And Ruth says, I met a man named Boaz. And Naomi's spirit lifts a little more and she says, oh, he's a nearer kinsman. Oh, maybe things aren't completely hopeless. You need to go to him. And we know the story. And now here, I imagine Naomi with Obed holding him and everybody's coming by. And it's not her grandson by blood, but it's her grandson. It's the carrying on of the inheritance of Mahlon. And she is beaming now. There, verse 17, the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying this. Now, just a few months, a year earlier. Oh, God is bitter. God's bitter. Don't call me Naomi. Don't call me sweet because God's bitter. Here, a year later, there is a son born to Naomi, and she does not say, call me Mara. She says, yep, God is sweet. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I think she joined with them when they said, blessed be the name of the Lord. In chapter 1, I'm sorry, I was supposed to say she was rejected. You know, here she was even of her own self. She thought she was rejected of God. And I think sometimes maybe we've all been there. She was rejected. She was rejected by God. She was rejected even really by society. She was without a husband now. And unfortunately, in that day, a woman without a husband was almost useless to society. But in chapter 4, she's restored. In chapter 1, she was without a son. In chapter 4, she has a daughter greater than 7 sons. Verse 15, he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better than 7 sons, hath borne him. What they're saying is, Naomi, we've all got sons. She's better to you than all of our sons are to us. That's what they're saying. Remember what Boaz said about her. He said, I've heard how good you are, how good you've been to your mother-in-law. I mean, that's not just something the town talks about unless it's extraordinary. And they said, Naomi, Ruth is like, it's better than having 7 sons. She's better for you than if you still had Mahlon and Chilion. What a great testimony she is. In chapter 1, she was empty. In chapter 4, she's full. I think she could say at this moment, if she had been able to see into the future and see the writings of David, she would have said, my cup runneth over. She was filled with the cup was running over into the plate. What do they call the plate underneath it? I was going to say that, but I couldn't make it make sense in my mind. The saucer underneath. It was just pouring over. In chapter 1, she was hungry. In chapter 4, she's filled. Ruth never wanted again. She never lacked again. Boaz would have made sure of that. Ruth would have made sure of that. In chapter 1, she's traveling back from the land of Moab. Why? Because she heard in the land of Moab that God had given a great crop in Bethlehem, that the house of bread was full again. In chapter 1, she lost her sons. In chapter 4, she becomes a nurse to a grandson. Again, it wasn't her biological grandson, but she was the nurse to it. Now, nurse in that verse 16, Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse unto it. It is not referring to her nursing the child. Dave, you have an ESV? You use ESV?
No, I haven't.
Okay, all right. Does anybody have a different translation than King James? Nobody? The other translations generally say that she put him in her lap. I think that's what the ESV says, is that she took the child and laid it in her lap and became nurse unto it. Nurse does not refer to the act of nursing. It refers to the act of caring for, as a nurse cares for a newborn. Yeah, just held him, rocked him. If became basically, yes, just became the caregiver No, I don't think she raised Obed. I don't think the idea is that she's the only one that cared for him. But I think what Boaz and Ruth did was they allowed Naomi to have a place in the child's life to where she cared for him, to where she gave special attention, to where whenever Ruth had had a long night, that Naomi would come and say, hey, let me take care of Obed for a few hours. Let me look after him. Let me watch him. And she became that to him. Number 3, the genealogy of David. I think she did. Her land was restored to her, but I don't think she lived there. I think we don't read that per se in the book, but I agree with that. I think that Ruth and Boaz, either Boaz built onto the existing house, or there was a room that she could stay in, or they had a chamber outside. I don't know, but I think she lived there closely, in close proximity to where they were, and was facilitated her to do that. If she didn't live there, it'd be very difficult for her to act like that, to act as a nurse. Again, they didn't have phones. They didn't have cars. If Ruth had that kind of situation, Naomi would have had to have been very close in order to act as a nurse for Obed. Number 3, the genealogy of David. And the names that are given here, Pharez. And Pharez is the 4th son of Judah. You can find that in Genesis chapter 38 and chapter 46, verse 12. He begat Hezron. Again, chapter 46 of Genesis, verse 12, mentions that as well. Who begat Ram? We don't know anything about Ram. Ram is mentioned in different places, but it's just his name given. All we know is that he's 3rd in the line of the genealogy given here. Then you have Amminadab, who is the father-in-law of Aaron, Exodus 6:23. And then you have Nahshon. And Nahshon is the brother-in-law of Aaron through his sister Elisheba. Nahshon had a pretty prominent position in Israel, among the children of Israel. He's mentioned several times in the book of Numbers. Meet him first, I think, in chapter 1. I think we'll meet him first in chapter 1. And then in chapter 10, when they leave Mount Sinai, headed towards Paran, Judah is given the honor of leading the children of Israel out of that area down to Paran. And Nahshon is the leader of the tribe. He's, for lack of a better word, the prince of Judah. And that's Numbers chapter 10, verses 13 through 14. And so of these names, other than Pharez being the son of Judah, Nahshon is a big name. I mean, he was a leader of the leaders in the nation of Israel. Then you come to Salmon. Salmon, we believe, is married to Rahab because of Matthew chapter 1. It's not Rahab in Matthew 1. It's Rachab, which is the Greek word for Rahab. And he's the father to Boaz. Then we have Boaz, Obed, Jesse. So there's the names. What do we have? 9 names before David. 6 names before Boaz. 9 names covering 640 years. And I'm going to give you this. Letter B, the situation. We have a situation here. Approximately 640 years from Judah to David. And there's only 9 men. But if you look at the names that we have, you have Pharez, who is Judah's son. That's pre-Moses. You have Hezron, who was the son of Judah. That's pre-Moses. Ram. Amminadab was the father-in-law of Aaron. So at Amminadab, we have a contemporary of Moses. After Amminadab, you have Nahshon. Nahshon's not, he's not around. We know this. If he is old enough to be considered the prince of Judah, and every man between 20 or above 20 years of age died before they went into the promised land, we know that Nahshon did not go into the promised land, correct? Nahshon begat Salmon. So Salmon is the first name that is eligible to even enter the promised land. So Salmon had, if he begat Boaz, had to have been born, correct, before they went into the promised land. So you have all of the book of Joshua and all of the book of Judges before we come to, in the book of Samuel, David. We have Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse. From the entering of the promised land to the book of 1 Samuel, you have 4 men. So, the situation is this. I mean, we talked about the book of Judges covering hundreds of years. Okay? So, all names given in here, all these names given are before or during the time of Moses, except Salmon. And Salmon really he was alive during the time of Moses. That's not an accurate statement. All genealogies of Christ, number 3, are consistent in the names and the order of the men. So, either Nahshon, Salmon, Obed, and Boaz, and really Nahshon doesn't really even apply right here. But Salmon, Obed, Boaz, and Jesse were aged, had to have been when their sons were born. Because David does not come on the scene until years after the book of Judges comes to a completion. Samuel was the last judge, and we're talking hundreds of years. So either they were aged or some names are omitted. You could make an argument for both, I think. I think you could make an argument that they were just old men when their sons, when Obed, Boaz, Jesse, and David were all born. Or some names are omitted. But I know this. Either way, we trust that God has given us exactly what we need to know. I wouldn't argue either way. I believe, my personal belief, is that what we have is the accurate record. It's just consistent. I think there's 4 total genealogies given with these men in them. 1 here, I think Chronicles has 1, Matthew has 1, and maybe Chronicles has 2, actually. But either way, God's given us exactly what we need to know. I'm not going to get in an argument with anybody over it, even though I believe a certain way. Sir? Well, I would argue with myself. But I'm not going to argue about the validity, the exactness of it. All I know is what God gave us. And if the men were older when their sons were born, so be it. If God left out some names, so be it. Either way, I just trust that God gave me exactly what I need to know. Right.
So it's a grandson, it's not a son. So the word son doesn't always mean a direct son.
Right. It does say begat. Now, can that be... Could that be interpreted? Could we infer that in his line he begat? Could we then infer that Pharaz begat David? I guess we could just follow through on that. Could we interpret that Orland Reynolds begat Wesley Orland Reynolds? Yeah, he's a descendant. He's a descendant. So either way, what a beautiful picture of the redemptive love of Jesus Christ and the advent. Hey, these things worked out so perfectly that Ruth was in the position to be the great-grandmother of the great king and the great whatever it is, great-grandmother of the great Redeemer, Jesus Christ. I don't know where we're going next. I got 2 weeks to figure it out. Next week we don't have midweek service. There's no Tuesday night or Wednesday night service. I'm leaning towards Job, but I don't know. There's just that's a difficult take, but I might do it. So in 2 weeks, surprise. I'll just surprise you in 2 weeks. I may let you know the next Sunday, but we'll move into something, and it'll be a blessing to us. Hopefully, it'll be a blessing. I hope you've enjoyed the book of Ruth. I have. I've enjoyed seeing the love story. Did you know that? Let me go back to the passage. You can go ahead and take me off the live stream, Stephen. We'll just have some family time right now.